Very nice. Each time it's a little bit different, which is sort of fun for me at least, and hopefully for you too. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AudioMax. And welcome to this edition of the ETH Global Lecture Series entitled Empowering Innovation, Thriving, not surviving, but thriving in the Age of AI. My name is Chris Luebkeman, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of leading the Strategic Foresight Hub within the Office of the President here at ETH Zurich. And most importantly for you, I'm the host to make sure we start on time and end on time, so we will end at 6:30. The Global Lecture Series brings the world's leading minds to ETH Zurich to explore ideas that are shaping and will shape our future. And we aim to foster broader understanding, enhance innovation, and deepen impact through thought-provoking dialogue and diverse perspectives. I think all of us in this room who have chosen to be here are very interested, obviously, in this topic today, both innovation and the AI part. It is an incredibly important and vital topic today, the age of AI. For some, this brings fear reactions. For some, brings excitement and thrills, uncertainty, opportunity. Where does that stand for all of us in the room tonight? As we navigate this transformation, we need you, and we'd like for you to consider where you stand in shaping and creating what it will take to thrive in this new era. Now, I'm going to invite our guests up in just a few moments, and you will also have a chance to give us questions to ask. So we have a couple of helpers who also checked you in. If you have a question, we have little cards which you can then write the questions on, and then they'll bring them up to me, and we can integrate those into our conversation. And I do that because sometimes 3 or 4 questions will come up at once and say, okay, we got to ask that one, and someone might ask a really random question about some algorithm that I've never heard of, or we might get to that one as well. So just saying, who knows where we're going to stand with those. Now, that's enough for me. Our special guest today is an ETH alumna and also a digital shaper, Petra Ehmann. So Petra, come on up, join me up here. Let's give her a round of applause as she joins you on the stage. It's great to have you back again at ETH. Did you ever have a class in here?
I didn't have a class in here, but I remember we had 2 events here after I graduated, which I moderated.
Oh, very cool.
Yep.
So what does everybody in the room need to know about you that's relevant for tonight's conversation?
I've seen already some familiar faces here, but nonetheless, I think what's good to know about me, I'm an executive and board member. I'm somebody who loves to turn ideas into impact, who empowers teams to turn those ideas then into products and scale them. And I'm a woman who loves to shape the future. I love to create what will actually lead to the revenue in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm in the board of directors at Bossart, which is a publicly listed company here in Switzerland. You should all know it. And actually, my colleague from the board is also here. Very excited for that. Then also at DKV Mobility, which is privately owned, based or headquartered in Germany. And until a few weeks ago, I was Chief Innovation and AI Officer at Ringe. And I also see somebody from my former team here. So thanks for joining. So that's good for others to know about me, I would say.
I think that's really good because that gives you the sort of the business side, and you were also at Google for a while.
I used to work at Google before I was hired to Ringe. Worked there in various functions, basically. I think one of the things that was constant throughout all those functions was it was about creating new products that led to new revenue streams or led to new user experiences. And so the last one was in augmented reality, where you might have tried it out on Google Maps when you got the navigation in airports, shopping malls, train stations, because people spend 90% of their time in indoor venues, not outdoors. So that was important. Or before that, in advertising, helped Google shift revenue to YouTube through closing some new deals.
That's great. So exactly, that's this red thread for me, for you, has been really looking at user needs, user opportunities, and how do you innovate into that, right? Yes. And that's really great. Great. Thank you. Petra, if you want to grab a seat for a moment, thank you very much. And our ETH colleague who is going to be joining us today is Professor Stefano Brusoni. Stefano, come on up, please. Give him a hand as he comes up. And the same question to you, Stefano. What does everybody in this room need to know about you that's relevant for tonight's conversation?
Very little. I study innovation processes, obstacles to innovation, and technical change since the mid-90s, looking at how digital technologies are developed and, most of all, adopted in user industries. I focus very much on these lengthy, difficult, nitty-gritty kind of processes that enable users, adopters, to actually get competent at the new technologies. And these processes are usually very slow, actually, full of mistakes and misunderstandings about what the technology is actually good at. As our first reaction with a new technology is always to fit it into the categories of the old technology. So we got computers, and for 10 years we used them as typewriters without paper. Sure. But you can do a few more things than that. And you can see this all the way from digital control systems and jet engines, that was my doctoral thesis, to robotization, automation, early machine learning, blockchain. You always see these patterns. That doesn't make prediction any easier about solutions, do not. But the pattern is kind of clear.
That's really great. And so, Stefano, thank you very much. And we're going to get started right now with that conversation. So, as I see it, we have two parts to this dialogue, really. One is around innovation, and then how we thrive in this time of AI. And if we think of the word innovation, we are at an academic institution, so we can start off with a little bit of a definition. The root of the innovation is around renewing, innovare, to renew or to alter. And so it's very interesting to think how we define innovation for ourselves. So how do you define innovation?
So to me, innovation is giving longevity to a company, making it invincible so that it will thrive in the future. And basically to do that, you got to ensure that you build value for your customers. And so innovation, maybe it's easier to think about what is not innovation. So innovation is not a bunch of geniuses who sit in a room and they tinker something crazy. Innovation is not a fun, colorful park with nice cushions, etc. It's hard work. And innovation is not you throw billions of dollars into this one brilliant idea and then everything happens. But innovation is really a lot of exploring. You got to have a vision where you want to go, your North Star that you'll follow, but then you'll explore because you don't know which of those bets that you'll have will work out. So you're going to have constant iteration. And now on the entire innovation spectrum, you can have like very efficient innovation, efficiency innovation, or very transformational innovation. And so for efficiency, it's you can see that basically in the car industry a lot. So you get a navigation system, it has an airbag, etc. So the car gets better and better and better, but it's still a car. Whereas on the transformational part, you enter a new market, you explore a new geography, new users, new services, etc. And both sort of has to work together if you really want to give that longevity to the company.
That's very fascinating. The longevity, the long value, to help it thrive, survive, and make it through the different waves. Stefano, what about for you? How do you define innovation? You're the professor of innovation.
So at some level, there is a statistical definition, a statistical office definition of innovation, which is the first commercial application or new product or new process, which is a beautiful definition because it assumes away everything which is important, which is the process that lead to that first commercial application. It is important, nevertheless, because it does emphasize that we count innovations, if you like, the moment there is a market hit.
Do what again?
There is a presence on the market with a new product or a new process. And that's important because in the end, again, the longevity of an organization, which is a very important concept, comes from being competitive. And there is plenty of evidence that the main driver of long-term competitiveness is innovation, right? Of any kind, by the way. Then there is discussion there, what is most important, when and where, but that is what makes companies sustainable in the long term. Again, the evidence is super clear. Now, the challenge here is what? That very few companies are really good at becoming systematic innovators. A lot of companies, a lot of people are very good at having one good idea, which is excellent, but very few are good at being systematically good, right? And to understand that difference between the occasional innovation, still important, versus the more systematic ability of remaining innovative in the long term, then you have to look at the processes that Petra was talking about. Because it's this process of trial and error, and then again an error, where you stay persistent as an individual, as a team, as an organization, that really set apart the occasional innovators from the systematic innovators. And that is the most important thing and the most difficult thing to achieve. Because, again, it's not one person. It's a whole bunch of people that work together or not in different ways, with different backgrounds, that over time have to remain organized and committed, even when they're going to be facing more errors than successes along the way.
I'd like to add something there because I think it's so important what you just said. It can be everybody who can innovate, but few of them do. And it starts with the processes. And I think processes are super important. And also, how are those processes implemented?
Yeah.
There's a company, for instance, in China, Ping An, and the founder told the new incoming co-CEO, you're going to fail. And what he actually meant was, you're going to learn to experiment, and a bunch of those experiments are going to fail. And if that happens at the very top, then they have authority to really try, and then it can work. But it has to come from the highest levels so that it actually thrives.
And there must be evidence that the highest level is actually serious.
Yes.
When then people fail, because that's painful. Because again, innovation, if you look at the process, that's fundamentally a learning process. And learning processes are super important, but they're usually not efficient because they imply mistakes. So if you want to translate that, is a waste of resources in the short term. In the long term, nope. That's a springboard for something better and newer. But the commitment and the persistence are fundamentally important to go from the bright idea, of which there is no short supply generally, to the actual implementation in practice and at scale. Yeah. Because then there is also the issue of scale to bring in, which is another problem in itself.
So, fantastic. So efficiency versus transformational, occasional versus systemic, and the focus on the processes. You know, when I was focusing on innovation a while ago, is always a practical application of a new idea. Let's just use that as my definition. And I liked how you put it into really focus on a corporate standpoint. And you mentioned here a little bit about culture. And we started this talk getting into culture and how important corporate culture, company culture, our own culture is. So tell us a little bit about mindset and culture and the importance of that when it comes to the innovation.
Do you mean me?
I'm looking straight at you, okay. Petra, so you go for it.
All right. So when it comes to culture, what Stefano actually mentioned is that authority to fail. That's an important one.
Permission to fail.
Or permission to fail.
That's interesting. Authority to fail or permission to fail.
I was wondering, I think that was a wrong word.
Okay, well.
Excuse me. That is super important, and it has to come from the board. So the question then is, how do you actually bring in that experimentation? And the way how I did that at Ringier was, so when I started, I asked everybody the same 5 questions. And I realized there's something new that I have to build if I want to bring in innovation. And Ringier, I'm not sure how familiar with the company. It has 140, 50 different brands in 21 different countries. So I can't just work one-on-one with all of them. So I launched an accelerator called Ringier X. And in that accelerator, we brought this mindset into the companies. And then the accelerator started to act like a multiplier into all the different companies, because there were teams from Ghana to South Africa to Poland, Slovakia, etc., in the accelerator who experienced how to work in that way. And so what we actually nailed them down is we had a scale of 5 different levels of evidence that they had to bring. And when everybody starts, you start at level 0, most of the times. And then you move up the ladder. Whether you have user interviews is probably the weakest level of evidence. Then users who sign up is already stronger. Users who actually pay is the strongest. And so you move on that scale and you try to bring in that mindset, bring the evidence, and then you can continue your product, building your product. So this is how I tried to bring in a different mindset shift into
it's
the
very interesting.
companies.
So how, and for me, it's an interesting question, maybe to both of you. How important is it to create this also the safe space within a corporate setting to allow this to bubble a little bit before you send them back into their P&L whip, right? Right? No, I mean, it's very interesting because you have to. Yeah.
So it was a 3 stages process. They started in the seed program, then they moved on to startup and to scale, and then once they graduated, they went back into P&L. So it was a transition phase there. But while they were within that incubator, they were like on a bit cushioned. And it depended then on us how much information we were passing on. And my team, and Thong actually sits here, coached those teams so that they could learn the ropes and start actually getting that evidence that was required.
That's interesting, sort of infiltrate a little bit. That's my word, not yours. It's just because I find that sometimes you have to do that. Stefano, what about your observation over the past almost 30 years of looking at innovation within a corporate setting? Does it need to have its own little place where it can start typically, or does it work when the CEO, he or she or they say, "You shall innovate"?
I think it's always good to start small. And I think these innovation labs or innovation ecosystems who also open up boundaries toward the external environment are useful. The challenge is that sometimes they're very much designed as, following the saying, whatever happens in Vegas, stay in Vegas. It shouldn't. It should go out. And that's the most difficult transition because, again, you can train people to become more innovative as individuals and in teams. You can get them to develop new ideas, to prototypes repeatedly. But then that thing has to go to some business unit, existing or new. And that is the P&L whip that comes back. And that's a very dangerous moment for any innovative ideas because that's bound to impact people with P&L responsibility that we must respect because this is how salaries are paid, right? And they become suddenly careful because we got the good thing here going. Why do I need to change it? Because in X years it will be better. Sure, but look at my KPIs now. And going back to your point about culture, I think 2 things. Culture is a very big object, right? And I like it to simplify it into 3 things for the sake of being able to design a study. So my life is simple. One is skills, which is the part we're referring to. We have to train people, to educate people, to think a bit more broadly, a bit more innovatively, a bit more forward-looking. That can be done. But then there is the piece which is about motivation and incentives. We have to give them the right KPIs. And clearly, particularly in large organizations, the KPIs are bound to be oriented to financial outcomes in the short term. That's difficult. That's understandable. It's easy to criticize. I mean, people like me like to criticize that because we have the luxury of designing projects that can last 5 years plus, which is why I'm here. I'm very happy about this. I'm not complaining. But I also understand that people in industry don't always have that luxury. No. So the challenge here is realigning the skill development part with the motivation and incentive part. When you realign those 2, then you see different behaviors. And then you can also scale. And these 3 pieces, skills, motivations, behavior are the moving parts that actually change corporate cultures, but it takes time.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree on that. And so you said skill. The second one was?
Motivation. Or incentives.
Yeah.
And then behavior will follow.
Exactly. For the incentives, it's actually tough because most of the incentives, the whiplash, is EBITDA.
Yeah.
And the moment they get out, they immediately measured against that. And obviously, then at the beginning, they look really bad. And then it depends how long of a lean way they're given. But what actually works to turn that now into a positive is in one of the boards, we're measuring new products being developed and as an aggregate in the past 3 years. So every product that is up to 3 years old. Yeah. And so I think that gives sort of an aggregate, and it also gives an indicator at the highest management level how innovative the company actually is.
Really is,
yeah, or not.
Yeah, that's really great. Okay, let's lay on now the age of AI. It's 3 years. It has an early birth date. It's much longer. Blah 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 blah. We know all that. But this is what we're here now to think about. How is this age of AI going to be impacting this innovation process? Petra, how do you see this?
The innovation process by itself, I don't think that it will tremendously change because you still got to build a product that a customer wants, needs, buys at the end of the day. So you still got to get the evidence. Now, what will change is the velocity, how fast you're getting to that point. So with all the different tools, use Lovable, use N8N, use Cursor, etc., you can build prototyping really fast. Yep. Then you can throw them out and see where you got the biggest traction. But then you still got to build the product eventually. So the velocity is one of the key things that will change. And another thing that will change is we enter an era of hyper-personalization. So I think the mass products will see sort of an end, but at the end of the day, you'll have your tailored product, your tailored news catalog, your tailored medicine to your needs, what you actually need. And that is possible through AI. And I think here we just stand at the very beginning.
Okay. Stefano, what about you?
I very much agree that speed and customization are two things that we'll need to monitor closely because that's where we are likely to see new things. On the process, I agree. The fundamental building blocks are not likely to change. One thing that seemingly, at this stage at least, and then in 6 months it will be different, is actually qualitatively hard to compare to beforehand, is this. So we always use technology to innovate instruments of different type. Take a pocket calculator, just as a very simple example. A pocket calculator is a super useful instrument to solve complex problems. It's very much integrated in everything we do. In many ways, or computer, if you like. Now, the peculiarity of the pocket calculator, though, is that in order to use it, I have to give it instructions. Sum up these two numbers and give me the result. And then I plug the result into whatever else I'm doing. With generative AI in particular, yes, you can use it that way, but it works way better if you share with the machine. I think it's important to remember this is a machine. Why we are solving that problem? What is the goal? What is the audience, the potential customers? It's a way to use it that requires that we share our problem representation, not only the specific step in the problem-solving process, but what is the overall problem representation that we have in mind at that specific point in time? Because if we can't do that, that's what we do with prompting, by the way. Yeah? If we can't do that properly, then the machine becomes way more effective at giving us more than the sum of two numbers. And suddenly we are engaged in a conversation which we didn't have with the pocket calculator that is actually shaping the problem. Not so much, or not yet the solution. And I think that difference that we all experience again when we prompt is my current candidate for the most important qualitative difference in the innovation process itself.
And probably we got to put even more thought in that than before.
And you got to be competent, right?
Exactly.
Because you have to be able to explain to a pretty clever junior colleague, I mean, very clever, very committed, but kind of incompetent at the job at the beginning, what the job is about, right? And it's hard work, and it does require a certain level of skills.
Yeah. One thing that came to my mind on the way here, it's sort of related. I read a LinkedIn post of a friend complaining about tons of AI-generated LinkedIn posts, and that LinkedIn starts to become very cringe. And that actually goes to your point. With AI, you can just blast out so much different content.
Yeah.
And then the question is, who actually wants it? So to your point again, you need to even think harder. What is it that you want to convey?
Yeah.
So I think, to me, I'm looking at two different issues here, in a way. Okay, one reminded me of when I was heading up the R&D group, and I asked them, guys, what do you do? And they said, we answer questions. This is your 2 + 2. I said, what do you do? And he said, well, we never answer the question. I said, you just told me you answer questions. I said, no. Someone asks us a question, we ask them why. We don't give them an answer. This is what you're saying. We have to actually interact with this tool to help explain the context, to find out what really is the right question. And so this is the generative part that queries and challenges you. And you're pointing out something which is these other kind of tools which create this new spam, this new level of spam, which we haven't experienced yet. And how do we deal with this capability of a proliferation which we never could have before? It's sort of this age of AI, trying to understand this context. I'm thinking, you mentioned front of house, but I'm thinking back of house. You were talking about people, so new products, but I'm also thinking back of house, where this age of AI is impacting and will impact from an innovation standpoint. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the back of house part of it, not just front.
Okay, that sounds good. So what I'm observing is lots of companies, they go now into, we can automate this process, we can automate that, we can make this faster. And this is all good. This is all the low-hanging fruits that you got to pick. This is your homework. This is what you got to do. And what I also observe is, irrespectively which company, is the pleasure to do, we do 130 use cases. We have 66 use cases in AI. And just by the quantity, again, people are excited how much they do. But the big question is not how much you do, but what is the impact of it? So what was important to me at Ringy is that we introduced high-impact use cases where you want to focus on. So I think this is for the efficiency type of innovation. But then there is even another untapped field where few are looking into. Most look into processes that they can change in the finance department, in the marketing department, in the comms department. Everybody for themselves. But what if you think cross different departments? What if you try to think about a new how does the vision look like of your industry actually also across the industry where you want to be at? And how can AI, if you stitch two departments together and build a process there across the boundaries, how can that then impact potential customers down the line? That is where few companies are at yet, but I think that is what will fundamentally change. You will not win by just automating everything because everybody is doing that. So this is just being at eyes level. But you got to think beyond that. So how can we actually transform across different silos?
Which makes many people very uncomfortable.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, some people like it, some other people don't like it so much.
Change is a strange beast.
Yeah, we had just the conversation about that before.
It's strange. No, I mean, it's interesting because I think that's where some of the culture and some of the threat comes in. You're blurring a boundary, and I've liked my boundary because I have my chair. And I don't know about your chair. I like my chair. This is sort of a very interesting thing. I would like to remind everybody, did anybody have a question yet? Okay, there's a couple hands up. So if we can bring the cards and pass them down to those who put your hands up so the cards can come to you. It'd be really fantastic. And we can leave them up there for a minute. So I see I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to write the questions out. And I please beg you to use your best handwriting. All right? Don't use Saturday night at the pub handwriting. Use your 7th grade handwriting class if you had such a thing like I did. I don't know if they teach handwriting anymore, but it would be really helpful.
This is the first time I'm sitting in an audience where there are so many hands up.
Well,
right instantly.
Oh, come on, Petra. This is ETH. This is our audience. This is our people here. So, as they're coming up with their questions, I'm going to ask you both. I mean, just looking at that, is this a good time to start a new company?
I think yes. I think now is the time when, if you look at the top 10 companies according to market cap, it's all tech companies right now. If you look like 20 years ago, it was the ExxonMobils, Walmarts, etc., GE, etc. So it completely changed to tech. And I think if you look 10 or 20 years out again, I think now is probably the time where new companies are getting started that are being built right now that will eventually show up in this top 10 ranking.
I hope so. They can start right here, right? This is the important part. Stefano, when you look at the innovation, and I'm going to ask you about the same question about starting a company now, but back of house, front of house, because Petra was talking a lot about front of house. How do you see it from an innovation and an AI standpoint now? This differentiation between front of house, new kind of sexy stuff, back of house, the old processes.
I mean, I think that tension has always been there. I think irrespectively of what kind of technology is now driving the wave of growth and startups and stuff. And both sides are important. I think we tend to underestimate the second one. I think what I would like to see more in the back end, or what I call the back end, or the processes, is really two things. One, acceptance of the idea that to be innovative, you don't need to have a bunch of crazy people trying out randomly a bunch of new things all the time. You need a way of organizing these people, right? And that nitty-gritty part is important. And of course, the processes have to be flexible and all the stuff, but you still need processes. And one very important process that right now I think is very important, quite underestimated and generally disconnected from the discussion about innovation at times of AI, is dear old learning and development, training, at scale. So there is obviously everywhere this request for upskilling. We see it very clearly at ETH. But while the sort of the calls for upskilling are very broad and very loud, that doesn't translate in demand for upskilling. And the difference is willingness to take part of a course, a class. And willingness means people don't have time because times are difficult. And the business cycle is complicated because there is a willingness to pay argument. As one of my roles here is Vice Rector for Weiterbildung. So we do have offerings and we do have general interest. We see also applications, but not in the numbers that you want to see. We see companies being less and less willing to support their employees in joining courses generally across the board. And we see people very cautious in taking time off their work to upskill because things are quite complicated. Everywhere people don't want to take time off because they want to be sure there is still a job to go back to in the end. And I think that's part of a reflection that we should have also about what kind of programs we offer. Because the kind of programs we offer, well, we design them in terms of formats, not content, those we change, but in terms of formats from a long time ago. So they're kind of long and I think a bit cumbersome for the needs in the industry right now.
So I want to stay on the skills thing for just a moment, because I know, as you said, you're the Vice President for Continuing Education. And Petra, what kind of skills would you suggest that Stefano should be making sure that he has in his continuing education classes?
Let me check.
So we're going to in order to be really ready to be able to thrive in this age of AI, what would you suggest were some of the skills which we need to be ensuring that our students and the weiterbildung students have?
Well, if we go back to the discussion that you actually started, the most important one is having some very deep knowledge that AI cannot have in a domain field, but then also having that critical thinking in order to make up your mind where you want to go. Because one of the most important things is you got to know where your North Star is. You don't know which path you're going to take at one point, but you got to know where to go. And so that critical thinking is, crucial.
So I think that is super important. And again, there are two sides to the discussion. One is the contextual knowledge. And the contextual knowledge, we don't have it. That's people from industry who have it. The activities, the programs we have tend to emphasize critical thinking. And there is a bunch of ways in which that can be evaluated, assessed, even measured, if you like, and then applied. But the difficult thing is really combining the contextual knowledge that comes from the participants to our studies, to our programs, with the skill development abilities that we do have developed over time. For example, one thing we are trying to increase as much as we can is project-based learning, because in a project, the students can bring in the context. If we make up a fictional project, we can. And it's good for developing critical thinking. Right? It works. But then that doesn't give you necessarily the ability of then explaining any Gen AI tool. What are the boundaries of the problem that you're trying to solve in that specific context? So I was referring earlier to these programs we run over 18 months, which I love dearly, and they're excellent programs. But it's 18 months of a program. And right now, the pace of change in industry is a little bit faster than that. Yeah. So we are trying to breaking this down in smaller programs. We are going to go into micro-credentials so people can take a few days of a workshop. But I think the challenge here is finding ways in which industry and university, not only us, generally university and industry, can co-design these programs. Because we look at different contexts at this height here. But to be able to interact with these machines cleverly, you need the understanding of the context at this level of depth. And we need to somehow to bring the two levels together, because otherwise this upskilling remains something that we can sort of deliver in a certificate, good. But in practice, then there is another leg there that needs to be kind of dealt with.
Yeah, and maybe two other points. I think you made me think in terms of people need to become like AI natives, not just AI experts. Yeah. And so probably that is one thing that is a bit more detangled from industries where ETH could go more at full speed.
Yeah.
And the other one is probably communication/team play.
Yeah. This stuff is also important. I mean, there is always a technical core to our programs, and I think people should become competent at different AI tools technically. But then they have to leverage that level of technical competence, which is kind of well codified and can be achieved with the context and with the critical thinking and the ability of engaging others. Again, it could be communication, it could be something else. But again, you were saying at the beginning that there is no one single innovator, there's always a team. And one of the biggest challenges that people face when they leave our programs, I think, is transferring back what they've learned. And that transfer, to some extent, is engaging their colleagues also in learning and education on a real project. And that is down to communication and to really the ability of explaining why this stuff is important now.
Okay.
I see Chris is trying to take it back on.
All right. You've done a beautiful job of filling the time so I could actually read some of these questions. You know, I knew Stefano could do that, you know. Yeah. So, but in all seriousness, excellent questions. Really, and I hope I get to all of them. So, Petra, I'm going to read this because I like your mission to bring ideas to reality for the right impact. What are the biggest challenges you see in this journey? That's actually an interesting question for both. When on that journey, what are some of the biggest challenges you see on that?
So I'll start maybe with the beginning. When you have an idea, you can argue against or in favor of that idea. And whether the idea will work, nobody knows. So it's like, it starts like, it's like an ugly baby nobody wants to look at. And Ed Catmull said that, actually.
No.
And
Well, the parents want to look at the ugly baby.
I
Okay,
think
I
the
get that.
analogy is kind of interesting because the ones who have the idea are in love with it, but then for others to adapt it is really tough. And there is where already a lot of ideas get filtered out or deleted that might have become the next big thing. So it starts even at the very beginning. And I see.
But what about when you're pitching to something? I mean, you know, very often you brought up communication. Right? You can have the best idea in the world, but if you can't share it or can't communicate it, it doesn't really matter.
It is. I think it's two-way. It's one thing that you're sending the information, and the other way is the information that people want to receive. You might pitch it to people who just don't want to hear that idea.
So around pitching, someone's asked a question, when you pitch an idea to a large company in the age of AI, where algorithms rather than humans in HR are screening candidates and retrieving proposals, what do we do? So it's, very often, I know from my daughter, she sent out, hundreds of resumes, and she said she got very few responses that seemed to be written by a human. Right? So in this age of AI, what do we do, right? When the algorithms take control of the gatekeeping.
So I think if you're a student and you're trying to apply for your first job, obviously selling cold application is one thing, but it has never been the most successful way to land a job. And it will become even less successful path down the line because of exactly the reason that you mentioned. So I think probably being in touch with companies early, working your network will become even more important than before. Or maybe you have the opportunity to work with a company and say, hey, I have that idea that you should do, and you find somebody and you start just working with them on an occasional project to get your foot in the door and that they see you what you can do. So probably a shift in that path.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a view on this, Stefano?
I think that is one of the single most pressing concerns I have about the use of AI, which in HR processes generally has been applied since before Gen AI was there, the whole big data analytics things. And to some extent, I understand the reason when you have hundreds of thousands of applications to deal with across a bunch of companies, you want to automate and make it more efficient. Now, the challenge with that is this makes, as you say, the personal connections super critical. Now, the problem with personal connections is that they tend to be conservative and cliquey. And that reduces the opportunities the students that come from social background that put them in a position of disadvantage can actually leverage. And I think here is a very good example. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using AI. I mean, that's unavoidable. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But I think the process of designing these personal connections, these projects, is super important because as a higher education institution, our job is very simply that of making sure that at the end of their studies, our students have more opportunities than at the beginning of their studies. Mm-hmm. Right? That's a job. That's a very simple, irrespective of where they come from. Correct? And some of these technologies that are deployed for understandable reasons are pushing against that. So I think that is, I don't have any solution to offer, do not. But in terms of problems, that's a big one.
Interesting. More opportunities when you graduate than when you had coming in.
That's a job.
Yeah. I like that. That's good. I've never seen that in our job description, but I'll add that now into our strategic plan. I think that's good. No.
Sure.
The other side of the coin is that the company, because she has this automated
Yeah.
process,
Yeah. Oh no, I entirely agree. There's a lot of waste in the process around this way. Absolutely, yes. I'm not saying, and I think that is super important for us as an institution, for the companies as institutions which are seeking new talent, and they might end up actually limiting their search in the effort of becoming efficient, which is the typical paradox when technologies are new, by the way.
Petra, you mentioned looking beyond process innovation for AI use cases. Could you give an example of a cross-department AI innovation that you could get excited about? Or you've seen one? It's interesting because it's blurring of the boundaries, getting an example of what something could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there is what I mentioned at the very beginning is start with the user first and think about what the user actually wants. Because your job as a company is that your customer is happy. And so instead of thinking, my customer comes to me here for doing this job and then comes here for doing that job, think about what is the spectrum of everything that we're offering from, I don't know, fueling your car to providing payments, from reading news to a job to real estate. Like whatever you have, like what does the customer actually want to do? And then offering those solutions to the customer right away instead of offering one product for this, offering one product for that. Merge them a little bit.
Okay. Interesting. Someone actually had a question here on saying the Post app. So the Post app can do so many things, but only people use only like two functions. So the question is that how often, is it either push or pull? I guess it's offer or receive. So I'm trying to think about that when we think of how's it going to know what I want?
How do you know what the customer wants?
Yeah. Does the customer know what he or she or they wants?
And that's dangerous. Actually, you should not figure out what they want because they changed their mind. And Steve Jobs actually once said, the moment you ask a customer what they want and you build it and you have the product and then they say, what the heck? Yeah. The thing is rather, which problem do they face?
Yeah, that's a good.
You got to figure out where are they stuck? Where do they spend lots of money? Where is a process that is so painful that it takes them a team of 7 people for 2 weeks to get this step done? If it's just providing a quote or if it's just providing, I don't know, whatever. And then figure out what is the pain point and solve that pain point.
Yeah.
But if you start asking people what they want, then...
There you go. I'm with you 100% on that, 100%. Stefano, you're pondering.
That's a professional requirement. I guess. But now that I feel committed to say something, I think this is super important. The problem and the need, not the want, because honestly, we're not. I would not ever underestimate the fact that the companies who are good at that are the companies who also have not stopped to invest in research and development. Because while the users and the customers are the sources of the problems we want to solve, and then possibly monetize a bit by all means, the source of solutions is still technology, science and technology, research and development. And there is a tendency that we see across the board in different countries, with exceptions like Google being obviously one, in reducing the investments in research and development or shifting away from research, fundamental research, and toward development. And we see that also in universities. Less at ETH, obviously, but again, think about the average, which is important. Universities are becoming more applied because we also need to raise more funds from industry in collaboration with industry, which is good, important. But again, once we know the problem a potential client might want us to solve for them, we still need to have the solution. And that comes from research and development. And a lot of that, historically, has been publicly funded. And we see less and less of that. And we see less fundamental research also in industry, on average. and more driven by few giant companies.
Okay.
There are issues there of governance you want to be careful with, but generally we need the problem that comes from downstream from the client, but we need the solutions. And those solutions come from science and technology.
Okay.
And I think one of the cruxes is that you should invest in innovation when you still have the funds.
Yeah.
However, once you still have the funds, you're actually thriving. So it's why should we innovate now? I mean, we can do that also later. But yeah, I think companies who are successful, they're investing maybe 10% of their revenue into R&D and new business development constantly.
Yeah.
If they're investing 10%, they're on the high end of the spectrum.
They're on the high end of the spectrum, but it's like it's a habit. Like you go to the gym if you want to be healthy, and so in a company you, have your.
Totally with you on that one. 100%. So here's another question from probably one of the youngest members of our audience here. Where is the most efficient, where is it in a company most efficient to use AI? Right? So within a company, where, I'm interpreting your question, young man. I'm just working on it, okay? Where is it in the most efficient as a company to use AI? So where would you suggest for a company, where should they be using AI? Like if you're going to go into a company and say, okay, where are the first places they should begin to look to integrate AI, Gen AI, or different tools, machine learning, where would you suggest? Did I get the question right? All right, good, thank you.
I think one is definitely interactions with customers, and we're seeing that. We all, I think, hated to be on the phone line and waiting and then answering a question, then the person didn't know. But I recently had a very pleasant experience. I'm having this Aura ring, and the battery was broke. So I chatted with the AI, and it immediately detected your battery doesn't work, and we'll ship you a new one. Here's your address. Is it correct? And I said yes. And so that chat was literally maximum 2 minutes, and the next day I had a new Aura ring at my doorstep. So those are very unpleasant experiences, but you can turn them into a brilliant experience. 5 years ago, I would not have said I'm talking about that experience because that would have been quite fun. But so in customer interaction is probably one way you could start. In market research or summarizing large piles of documents, that is also where you can immediately leverage impact. But this is one thing, and obviously if you use agentic AI, you can actually have an entire armada who actually creates you new events, writes you a report, etc. So there are other areas as well.
Very good. Stefano, you were nodding.
Also professional requirement. No, I think this is a very good point. I think it would be important to consider that AI is actually many different things, right? And there are applications which are very specialized. Think of stuff like AlphaFold, for example, which has been delivering incredible
protein
support to the pharma industry for quite a few years. Other tools are more horizontal in a way. And then different companies, a bit like different users, will have different problems, right? So this matching process is important to be made explicit when one thinks about AI, because again, there are many different tools at this point out there, and the number of tools is increasing by the day.
I think that's a really good point, actually, that when we're talking about a whole family with cousins and uncles and all this, it's not just one thing. As you said, there's the general models, there are specific ones. And here's someone's asked, it says, what can we do as individuals to thrive in this age of AI? How do we take charge in the face of this disruption? A question for both of you. What can we do as individuals to thrive? What advice do you have?
I think AI should become like a daily habit, or it's like your go-to tool for doing this or that, and you got to learn how to build your agents, you got to learn how to maybe automate certain processes in your inbox, that's or wherever other tasks that you don't like so much, so becoming really truly AI native and use it constantly. Read up upon it as well. Do some courses. There are a bunch of cool courses out there, and also certain companies offer like hackathons over the weekend. So it's a great opportunity to get in touch.
Be curious about it. That's the first. Be curious about it. That's the first thing. Yeah.
That would be a great first step. Yeah.
Yeah. Stefano, what about you for this? Because it's actually a really important. I think it's a really important question. Here, what
I think I will simply build on the curiosity.
On the what?
On the curiosity.
Yeah.
Being curious about it. Be skeptical. Going back to the critical thinking part. Not cynical. Cynical is no good. It's very boring. Skeptical. Don't trust when people show up and say that this machine is going to solve all your problems, because it will not. It will do some good, but not exactly. It's not exactly clear. Well, so be skeptical. To be skeptical and open-minded simultaneously. Then there are options, very large number of options, to become competent, to become native, or at least to be adopted into the family. But I think this is a good point in time to be a little bit skeptical, because you are mentioning good time to set up companies. Very true, absolutely true. But a lot of these new companies that pop up every other day make promises that they could deliver actually without AI. So if you are engineers, scientists, check that out. It's like when there was the blockchain explosion, a lot of that stuff could be done with Excel. Right? And then the market will catch up. Over time, you'll know which is which. But we don't have the benefit of time now. So we are in the here and now. So there is that element of skepticism that you can leverage to find the time to take a course, to become a bit more competent, and really form your own opinion about what's happening and what is in it for you.
Great, thank you. Now,
maybe adding also.
Very, very, very short, because we're running out of time.
Okay, very short. I think leaving grad school, you should be very optimistic. Because if you look at companies, you have such a solid training, and you're used to those tools inside out. Nobody in those companies has those skills. So I would use that as a huge leverage to bring in a new perspective, new skill sets into that respective company.
I like that. That's a great answer. So we're going to make a trial. These are short answers, like 2 or 3 words. And we've got 3 minutes of this, because I'm going to try to get through the rest of these, because these are really great questions. How do you resolve AI output explainability, since the architecture is heuristic and the output is not deterministic? Short answer?
We don't.
You don't. Okay, there you go. Petra mentioned transformation and efficiency innovation. Stefano said we need systematic innovation. Can you please name 1 or 2 companies which exemplify this, which we can take a look at? And because you have 1 or 2 companies we could say they are great examples to take a look at. Can you name 1 or 2?
In recent times, Google, certainly.
Yep.
IBM, historically, we can always discuss about the ups and downs of IBM, but they've been bloody good. NVIDIA, the transition from video games to what they're doing now.
Yep.
No, not plenty. I mean,
okay.
Nintendo?
Nintendo? Okay, there we go. So we have 4. That was 1 or 2. We got the name 1 metric that should be used to decide to scale or kill.
Huh.
1 metric. That's great. It's just like
metric.
User adoption.
User adoption.
Yeah.
Rate of user adoption, acceptance. Is a difference for AI.
Ultimately,
I think this is an apro question. Whoever wrote that, you get them on the apro. Where does innovation really start today? Traditionally, it was driven from customer needs. Has something changed? Is it still customer needs, or has something changed?
So can I say? Traditionally, yes. If the body of science and technology was there to offer solutions, you need both. And historically, we need science and technology, the supply side, and the users, the customer side. We need both. In different phases of evolution, one is dominant over the others, by all means. But over time, both, always.
Do you have anything to...
You can, with customer needs, definitely, but also product offering that you have.
Okay, I still have 8 questions. We'd have no more time. So I'm very, very sorry if you didn't get your question asked. We do have an apero afterwards. And I think what I'd like to say, thank you to both of you for a really fascinating conversation. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Now, this is our last global lecture of this year, but we are looking forward to a new year when we're going to have more global lectures coming your way. On Thursday, the 5th of March, we're going to be welcoming Pete Warden, the former director of NASA Ames Research Center. We're talking about space. And I think this is going to be a really, really, really interesting lecture. Very different domain than what we talked about tonight, but it's going to be a great one. So please join us for that one. When I think about what we've talked about here, innovation with an AI wrapper, it has struck me how important both topics are for all of us in this room to really be curious about and to learn as much as we can in order to be prepared for what's coming. And I think that was for me, very inspirational. I want to thank you for that and for your willingness to explore these themes with me and with us. And the final thank you is to all of you for choosing to join us today. It is really wonderful to see you here. And also, please consider supporting ETH through the foundation, because the foundation allows us to support students in their journey and faculty in their journey to make these kinds of dialogues become more meaningful, more impactful, and more real for all of us and every day. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for all of you. And one more round of applause for our wonderful guests.